Welcome to the deep dive. So, when you think about biology, your mind probably jumps all over the place. Microbes, ecosystems, DNA.
Climate change, what life even
Just
is.
so
It's a
you know,
huge field.
exactly. It's vast. And our mission today is to really cut through all that noise. We're not just going to list a bunch of facts for you. We want to give you the foundational structure, the
Right.
5 core ideas that let you organize and understand, well, everything in the life sciences.
And that structure is so vital. We've pulled together the material to focus on 5 unifying foundational themes. Think of them as, I don't know, the pillars of biology.
Okay.
If you can grasp these 5 ideas, you unlock the ability to place pretty much any biological concept, from a single cell to the entire planet, into its proper context.
So let's just lay out that framework right away. What are these big 5?
They are organization, information, energy and matter, interactions, and then the big one that ties them all together, evolution.
And to show you just how intertwined these are, let's start with a really cool example right off the bat. The Paramuscus polionotus mice, beach mice. If you go to the coastal dunes in Florida, these mice are a very light sandy color. But if you travel just a few miles inland where the soil is dark, the mice are the exact same species. They're dark-furred.
And that one observation, it tells the whole story of biology, really.
Yeah.
The color is a result of the mouse's organization and its structure.
Right?
That structure is built using the information encoded in its DNA. The environment dictates which color is better for survival. That's an interaction. And the difference between the light and the dark population is a direct consequence of evolution.
So it's structure, information, and all the dynamics leading straight to adaptation.
Exactly.
Fantastic. So let's start by grounding ourselves in those themes of structure, organization, and information. When we say organization, we're talking about this massive hierarchy of life. It's sort of like those Russian nesting dolls,
That's a great way to put it. You start at the very highest level, the biosphere.
The whole planet.
The whole thing. All life on Earth and every single place life exists. From the deepest ocean trenches up to the highest atmosphere. You zoom in from there, and you get ecosystems.
And that includes the non-living things too, right? Like the soil and water.
Absolutely. The living and the non-living components and how they interact.
Yeah.
Then inside that ecosystem, you find the community.
Which is just the living stuff. All the different
Now-
species, the trees, the fungi, the deer, the insects.
Right. And if you focus on just one of those species, like all the oak trees in that area, that's a population. And then, of course, the single unit is the organism.
And we can keep going smaller.
Oh, yeah. We go internal.
Yeah.
An organism is made of organs, which are built from different tissues. And tissues are made of the fundamental unit of structure and function, the cell.
And even inside the cell, it just keeps going. You've got specialized compartments called organelles.
Like the nucleus or the mitochondria. And those are built from complex molecules, which are, at the end of the day, just made of atoms. It is organization all the way down.
But here's the critical idea, isn't it? It's not just a pile of parts. It's the concept of emergent properties.
Yes, this is so important. New, very specific properties arise at each level because of the arrangement and the interaction of the components below it.
So you could take all the molecules that make up a chloroplast and mix them in a test tube, but you won't get photosynthesis.
Never. Because photosynthesis is an emergent property of that specific, highly organized structure of the chloroplast. The whole is literally greater than the sum of its parts.
That's a huge insight, and it leads to 2 different ways of doing science.
Right. You have the older approach, reductionism, where you break complex systems down into simpler parts to study them.
Yeah.
Like figuring out the chemical structure of one protein.
But the more modern way of thinking is systems biology.
Exactly. Because of emergent properties, you have to analyze the dynamic interactions between all the parts.
Right.
You don't just study one gene. You model how a change in atmospheric CO2 might affect the entire biosphere. It requires massive computation.
And tying all this organization together is the principle of structure and function.
The form always fits the task. Think about a leaf. Why is it broad and flat?
To maximize sunlight capture.
Perfect. Or the cell walls in a plant root. They're built specifically to absorb water. The structure serves the function.
And at that core level, the cell, we see 2 basic designs. First, you have the simply prokaryotic cells.
Right. In bacteria and archaea, they're smaller and they lack a nucleus and all those other membrane-enclosed organelles.
And then you have the more complex eukaryotic cells.
That's us. Plants, animals, fungi. Their defining feature is a true nucleus to house the DNA and all those specialized organelles that create compartments for different jobs.
Which brings us perfectly to our second theme of structure. Information and genetics. All that organization needs a blueprint.
And that blueprint is DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. It's packed into these structures called chromosomes, and along those chromosomes are hundreds or thousands of genes. Those are the units of inheritance.
The structure of DNA is just genius. It's that famous double helix with two long strands made of building blocks called nucleotides.
Right, we just call them A, T, C, and G. And all the information for building an entire organism is stored in the specific sequence of those 4 letters. It's a universal 4-letter alphabet.
So how does the cell read that alphabet?
Through a process called gene expression. It's kind of a 2-step assembly line. First, the DNA sequence for a gene is transcribed into a message called messenger RNA, or mRNA.
Okay.
Then that mRNA message is translated by the cell's machinery into a specific chain of amino acids, which instantly folds up into a working protein.
A great example of that is the crystalline protein. The cells in the lens of your eye are constantly making these proteins.
And they have to pack together just so the lens stays transparent and can focus light. If that gene expression goes wrong, your vision gets cloudy.
And here's what I think is the most mind-blowing part. That genetic code, that ATCG language, it's essentially the same for everything.
Everything. From the smallest bacterium to a blue whale. It's one of the most powerful pieces of evidence we have for our shared evolutionary history.
I mean, the amount of information is just staggering. A single human cell has a genome, its entire library of instructions made of about 3 billion of those nucleotide pairs.
3 billion. And that's exactly why modern biology isn't just people in lab coats with test tubes anymore. It relies on massive computational power.
You mean fields like genomics?
Genomics, which studies whole sets of genes, and proteomics, which studies the entire set of proteins an organism makes. You can't analyze that much data by hand.
So you need bioinformatics.
You absolutely need bioinformatics. Using powerful computers and software to store, organize, and make sense of this tsunami of sequence data. It's the engine driving biological discovery today.
Okay, so we've covered structure. Now let's shift to the themes of dynamics, starting with energy and matter. A cell can have perfect organization and information, but without energy, it's just a static blueprint.
Exactly. It can't do any work. And it's crucial to understand that the movement of energy is totally different from the movement of matter.
How so?
Well, energy flow is a one-way street. It enters an ecosystem as light from the sun.
And it's captured by producers, like plants, through photosynthesis.
Right. They convert it to chemical energy. Then consumers, like us, eat the plants. But every time that energy is used to do work, to move, to grow, some of it is lost as heat.
So it flows in, gets used, and then flows out. It doesn't come back.
It doesn't come back. But chemical cycling is a loop. The essential elements, carbon, nitrogen, water, they get used over and over again.
So plants absorb them from the air and soil?
Consumers eat the plants, and when anything dies, decomposers like fungi and bacteria break it all down and return those chemicals right back to the environment, ready for the next cycle.
It's a closed system for matter, but an open system for energy. Which leads us to theme 4, interactions. None of these systems would work without constant oversight.
And that oversight is managed through something called feedback regulation.
Which is basically when the result of a process controls the process itself.
Exactly. And the most common type is negative feedback. This is all about maintaining balance, or homeostasis. The response reduces the initial stimulus.
The classic example is blood sugar.
Right, the perfect example. After you eat, your blood glucose goes up. That stimulates your pancreas to release insulin. Insulin tells your cells to take up glucose in the blood, which
lowers the blood glucose level.
Right, and that lowered level is the signal that shuts off the insulin secretion. It's a beautiful self-regulating loop.
But sometimes you need to speed things up, not slow them down.
And that's where positive feedback comes in. The end product actually speeds up its own production. Think about when you get a cut. Platelets rush to the site.
And they release chemicals that attract even more platelets.
Right. It's a cascade that rapidly accelerates until you form a solid clot.
So that's internal interaction. But organisms are constantly interacting with their external environment, too.
Massively. They interact with each other. Competition, predation, mutualism, you name it. But they also interact with the physical world. A tree takes in CO2 and releases oxygen, changing the atmosphere.
And humans, I guess we are the ultimate example of environmental interaction.
For sure. Especially with our large-scale burning of fossil fuels, we've released so much carbon dioxide that it's intensified the greenhouse effect, raising the planet's average temperature by about 1 degree Celsius since 1900.
Which scientists call climate change. This isn't some future prediction. It's happening now.
It is. We see polar bears losing the sea ice they need for hunting. We're seeing populations of lizards in Mexico shrinking because it's too hot for them to spend enough time out foraging for food. The interaction is global, and the consequences are very, very real.
And that brings us to the core theme, the one that unites everything we've talked about: evolution.
Yes, this is the central idea in all of biology. It explains both the incredible unity of life, why a person and a bacterium share the same genetic code, and the breathtaking diversity of life.
To manage that diversity, biologists classify organisms into three huge groups, the domains.
Right, you have bacteria and archaea, which are both made of those simple prokaryotic cells. And then you have eukarya, which has all the organisms with complex eukaryotic cells, like us.
And eukarya is broken down further into kingdoms. You have plantae, which photosynthesize.
Of fungi, which
Oh,
absorb their
yeah.
nutrients. Animalia, which ingest other organisms. And then this big, diverse group of mostly single-celled eukaryotes called protists.
So where does the explanation for all this unity and diversity come from?
It came from Charles Darwin in 1859 with On the Origin of Species. And his first big point was what he called descent with modification.
Which basically means we all share common ancestors, but we've been modified over time.
Exactly. Think about the four limbs of mammals: a human arm, a bat wing, a whale flipper. They look very different and do different jobs, but underneath, the bone structure is remarkably similar.
Because we all inherited that basic blueprint from a common ancestor.
That's the descent. The different forms we see today are the modifications. And Darwin's second and most brilliant point was explaining the mechanism for that modification: natural selection.
And the logic here is just so elegant. It's based on two simple observations.
The first one is that individuals in a population vary, and a lot of those traits are heritable. They can be passed down.
And the second observation is that populations produce way more offspring than can possibly survive, which leads to competition.
Inevitably.
Yeah.
And from that, you draw a powerful inference. The individuals with inherited traits that are better suited to that specific environment are more likely to survive and reproduce.
So the environment selects for the traits that work best.
It selects for them.
Yeah.
And over generations, those advantageous traits become more common in the population. That process is called adaptation, and it's a perfect explanation for our beach mice. The sandy environment selected for lighter fur.
And this process, happening over millions and millions of years, causes species to branch off and diversify. It creates the pattern we call the tree of life.
That's the whole story right there.
So we have all these amazing themes, but none of it would be known without the actual process we use to study them, which is scientific inquiry.
Right. Science isn't just a body of knowledge. It's a way of asking and answering questions. It's a process.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts with observation and collecting data.
Which can be qualitative, like Jane Goodall's detailed notes on chimp behavior.
Or it can be quantitative hard numbers, measurements that you can analyze with statistics. And we use two types of reasoning to make sense of that data.
Okay.
First is inductive reasoning. That's where you go from a bunch of specific observations to a general conclusion. You look at thousands of organisms, see they're all made of cells, and you generalize. All organisms are made of cells.
And the other way is deductive reasoning.
Which is the if-then logic. You start with a general premise and make a specific, testable prediction. If my general premise is true, then I should be able to observe this specific outcome.
And that brings us to the hypothesis. It's not just a guess, is it?
Not at all. A scientific hypothesis has to be testable. And crucially, it has to be falsifiable. Science can only show that a hypothesis is supported by the evidence. It can never, ever prove it's 100% true. If you can't test an idea, it's just not in the realm of science.
Let's go back to that mouse camouflage experiment by Hopi Hoekstra. It's a perfect example of deductive testing. The hypothesis was that coat color provides camouflage against visual predators.
Simple enough. So they made plastic mouse models, some light, some dark. Then they put both colors in both habitats, the beach and the inland forest.
So on the beach, the light models were the camouflaged control group, and the dark models were the non-camouflaged experimental group.
And they just did the reverse inland. The data variable was the color mismatch. The dependent variable they measured was the predation rate, how many got attacked.
And the results were pretty clear, I take it.
Crystal clear. In both environments, the non-camouflage models got attacked way more often. It was powerful support for the hypothesis that natural selection via predation was driving the evolution of coat color.
And when a hypothesis is supported by just a massive, overwhelming body of evidence, that's when it can become a theory.
Yes, and we need to be clear about this word. In everyday language, theory means a hunch or a guess. In science, a theory is a broad, well-substantiated explanation for some aspect of the natural world. The theory of natural selection is one of the most supported ideas in all of science.
And it's a social process, too.
Absolutely. We rely on peer review to check each other's work. And we often use model organisms like fruit flies or mice because what we learn about their fundamental biology often applies to many other species, including us. It reinforces that idea of unity.
So we've laid out the map of biology. Organization and information create the structure. Energy, matter, and interactions drive the dynamics. And evolution provides the history and the mechanism for all that change. And we understand it all through scientific inquiry.
The evidence of unity is just overwhelming. We're all connected by that same genetic code, all descended from ancient ancestors. But here's a final thought for you to chew on. Evolution, through natural selection, generally works slowly over many generations.
Right.
But the environmental changes we're causing, particularly climate change, are happening astonishingly fast. So the question is, how will the relatively slow process of evolution be able to cope with the incredible speed of human-driven environmental change? And what does that mismatch in speed mean for the staggering diversity of life we know today?
A question that connects every single pillar we've discussed. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We hope this framework serves you well as you continue to explore these interconnected biological themes.